Thank you very much.
Yeah, Karen. Morning, everybody. So I don't intend to walk you through the slides. They're in your pack, but I will just sort of draw out sort of the key themes. So we already touched on ambulance handovers during the performance report, but just to remind boards that in terms of ambulance handovers, the Welsh Health Circular is very clear that the expectation is that ambulances are handed over within 15 minutes of arrival at the hospital. When we had the ministerial advisory group, recognising at that point there was some very excessive waits being experienced by ambulances on forecourts across Wales, they mandated sort of an interim proposal where we would be working to a 45-minute handover of emergency ambulances presenting at EDs. As we've already discussed, within Cwm Taf Morgannwg, we have seen significant improvements on the timeliness of handover of emergency crews in our EDs. And that has been we've taken a variety of approaches to that. So as laid out in the slide pack, you'll see a number of the initiatives that we've taken under our emergency transformation programme in order to deliver that. One on slide 5, which I just wanted to draw out, was the impact of the joint work we've done with our care homes with the navigation hub. And we have there seen a significant reduction in the number of conveyances from our care homes within the CTM footprint, ensuring that patients are not conveyed inappropriately, but that we're able to wrap around the right medical and nursing and AHP resource to support patients to remain safe in their homes. That's a programme of work that we're trying to roll out further. And the navigation hub has led some work across Wales now around head injury protocols, again reducing the need for conveyance of patients to hospital subsequent to a fall. On page 6, you can see of the slides. You will see the impact of these interventions on handovers, and that graph is for December, where CTM has the top performing sites across Wales, which remains a really positive indication of the efforts of our whole team in managing these. It is, this does create pressure, and I think it is really important to recognise that it is involving us working differently, but does create a pressure on the front doors, particularly as we try and move patients through in a timely way. But is really important as per the conversation we just had regarding then the impact that has on the response time of emergency crews for our population. Which is why we're so focused on following that through. We are continuing to work with WASC around that understanding of that improvement and how that's realising. And Claire and I are working with the JCC to look at how that is then performance managed for our populations. Because certainly some of the anecdotal feedback is that whilst we've seen a significant reduction in handover delays, not all of our neighbouring health boards have, and therefore part of our the indicative CTM capacity is being used to support other populations where there are delays on handover. January has been challenging, as board members will be aware. We were in a business continuity incident for around 2 weeks as we managed the pressures. I'm pleased to say that we stepped out of that earlier this week, which is again testament to the immense work of teams within the hospital, but also thanks to our colleagues in the local authorities who've also worked with us to try and ensure no undue delays in moving patients out back home during that time. our indicative data at the moment suggests that our 3 sites probably delivered between 70 to 75%. So we're just waiting for those numbers. So that is a drop on our December performance. But the positive thing is that the 3 CTM sites remain some of the top performing sites in Wales during that time as well. So we have retained as strong a focus on handover as we possibly can. As we go into February, there is an ask from Welsh Government that we now move to what we call immediate handover at 45 minutes. And so at the moment, if the team in charge of the emergency department do not feel it is safe to bring in that crew, we won't bring in that crew. What we're now having to work through is processes whereby if the ambulance service were to enact immediate handover, how would we take that patient off the ambulance trolley and accommodate them within the hospital? So again, it is about, as ever, is about then, so how do we manage that pressure across the whole system? So it is really important that only those patients that really do need to come to hospital are conveyed. But equally, why we then need an invigorated focus on further reducing delays at the back door, so that we can continue to absorb patients into the hospital in order to keep the front door working. So that leads me then to the next set of slides within the pack around discharge. And again, I think there has been a lot of focus between ourselves and local authority partners around how do we begin to address that. So the actions that we're taking as a health board and the governance around that are set out on pages 17 and 18, and how we're working, as I say, very much together. So there's been some really positive impact. So what we are seeing, particularly on pathway 1, so they are patients who are returning home, but with a package of care. We've seen some really positive progress. So now all health local authorities are moving to a trusted assessor direct to service model. So that started with RCT and it's now rolled out across all 3 health boards. This week, for example, in the Royal Glamorgan, we've seen the shortest time ever between a patient being declared clinically optimised and them going out to service. So for pathway 1s, that's been really positive. And in addition to that, the capacity of hospital at home has stepped up. And again, that again is supporting more and more patients to leave on that pathway 1. So whilst the total numbers don't look significantly lower for pathway 1s, the lost bed days, because the length has reduced, because the length of stay is reduced. So for many of those patients, from being declared clinically optimised to leaving, we're getting them home within about 5 days, which is a huge improvement on where we were before. The area that remains a real challenge for all of our patches is around pathway 3 patients. So they're patients who are moving into residential or nursing care. That pathway remains very slow. It is a complex pathway because, of course, we're awaiting assessments and acceptance of patients, and often, bed availability remains challenging. That creates a further challenge for us. So it is important when you look at our pathway 2 cohort, so they're patients that need rehabilitation. So they are distinct and different to our pathway 3 patients. Pathway 3 patients are patients that are to go straight to a nursing home. Pathway 2 patients are those that need that extended rehabilitation. What we're seeing is those patients having their care delayed, going into a rehab bed, because the rehab beds are also impacted by that pathway 3. So the vast majority of patients moving on from our rehab beds will be going on to pathway 3. So that creates a further challenge, and that's that is seen on a day-to-day basis. So really focusing now with local authority colleagues on how do we what more can we do to activate the market for pathway 3s. to ensure both an increase in capacity, but also a more timely transfer from hospital care to care home provision. Underpinning that has been some learning that we've done through the pre-Christmas sprint. That has continued and been built on then during our BCI. So, I think our focus on understanding the inside leg measurement of every patient in a bed now is good. And we have daily challenge on any patient that is declared red. So if we are not doing something to a patient, they have a red day, and we've got a forensic focus on every site every day of anyone that we're declaring is on a red day to understand. So what are we doing? How do we progress that patient's care and planning for discharge? So that, and we are now just moving into another sprint period, and I suspect we'll see a couple more of those which are centrally mandated during the rest of this winter period, and draw it through. What we have done, I think, is really strengthen the governance arrangement and the partnership working, and the support from the operational teams from all three local authorities over this period has been really great. To the degree that it has required very little escalation, the teams have worked well and collegiately. So I think in terms of how we're maturing as a system, is there. The challenge now is realising that in terms of a reduction in both numbers but also length of stay, particularly for that cohort. I don't intend to say anything more, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Gethin. A lot of really helpful data and analysis in the report. The challenges of flow are really quite acute, and as you said in conversation with me a number of times, that obviously you make some improvement in one bit, and then suddenly, like a balloon, isn't it? You want to squeeze this bit, and something gets worse somewhere else. But the consequence, I suppose, of doing much better in recent months, particularly in reducing the handover time, is that it just causes pressure further in if we're not able to address the system flow challenge throughout. But okay, yes, Kathy, thank you.
Yeah, just a quick question, and that was really good, really positive and proactive work in this space. It's obviously having a good effect. Just a minor point. So, on your pathway 3 patients, if you've got a delay to discharging them to a care home, is that like a new placement? So if they've come from a care home.
Yes. So if they're going back to their original care home placement, they'd be on a pathway 0 because they're going back to the same place. And that process works quite well. The challenge is that if they've been in for a prolonged period of time, often their space has been moved, has been released to another patient. And for domiciliary care, if they're in for more than 48 hours, that care package is then reallocated to another patient. So we often then have to go back to the start of the process. I get it for prolonged period. 48 hours often feels a little bit tight, because if a patient comes in, we're assessing them, we're just waiting to see the impact of some IV treatments, and often we'll then probably be able to get them home after about 72 hours. So again, there's work to do there. But for the pathway 3s are new patients going into it. Might be that they were in residential care and then are moving to nursing care, but they are new care pathways.
Yeah, thank you, Gethin. That was a really comprehensive update. In terms of the discharge targets, are they new targets? Did we have targets before, or are they new targets? And are they like our targets? Or are they the government targets?
No, they're our targets. So what we look at is understanding what is. So we've got really good data now that shows us every day what we expect in terms of admissions, and therefore what do we need in terms of discharges in order to be able to cope with today's work today.
Right.
One of our challenges is we often start the week on the back foot. So Monday we'll often come in with a cohort of patients waiting for admission, and so what we need to be doing really is having greater propensity of discharge at the beginning of the week to try and get back into doing today's work today. What we end up doing, particularly for the first few days of the week, is often being in arrears by a day. So what we've tried to do, and this is broken then down by specialty, so we're really clear what we expect, what we need from the medical wards, what do we need from the acute medical unit, what do we need from the surgical wards, what do we need from the trauma wards, knowing what our normal distribution of demand is over that period. And we, so orthopedic trauma requirements are greater in the winter than they are in the summer, because we know there's a greater propensity of frailty fractures.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Why don't you just, oh, sorry, please.
Just on that, I guess, so what is causing the backlog then? I feel like I know the answer to this, but what causes that knock-on effect on a Monday morning over the weekend that's not allowing us to start?
So I guess there's two bits. One is we're not going into the weekend with enough surge capacity. A number of our services run 5-day basis, not a 7-day basis. So we tried to recruit additional acute medics this year to try and shift to 7-day working for acute medicine and so forth. So not everything runs as intensely on a Saturday and Sunday as we do. We also nursing homes, packages of care don't commence over the weekend, except in rare circumstances. So the first thing is we need to be running at a greater level of discharge in the week to give us more headroom. So we don't run our bed capacity. If only we were running at 90% bed occupancy. So all of that sort of collides, and then of course lots of the patients that come in over the weekend, the clinical teams are often starting on day 0 on Monday to understand their baseline and therefore what's the improvement been, and can we get them home. So there's a whole raft of things, but a big part of it is how do we as a system function on a 7-day week.
So
brilliant piece of work, great improvement in the handover, and hopefully that will roll on into some good response times in the community. I suppose it may not be part of this piece of work, but is there data being captured on those pushing the people through the system faster? Is great for the hospital. What about capturing data on failed discharge and people who then don't who end up back in the system because they've had early discharge with either poor support or a failure of communication in the community?
So we do capture all of that, Sarah, and both from a quantitative perspective, but also a bit from a qualitative perspective. So we do reviews of patients that have come back into us that perhaps have gone home, I was involved with a patient week before last who was desperate to go home to die, and we wrapped around all the support, and actually the partner of that patient didn't feel they could cope, and so the patient came back in. So it's we often get issues or where and particularly recognizing for patients, a lot of our frail older patients have got a cognitive impairment, and that often will display itself in a challenging behaviour. And we know when you move a patient from one environment to another environment, we will expect an increase in some of those behaviours, and sometimes the homes just don't feel they're able to cope with that level of challenging behaviour, recognising that there's an opportunity for them to settle. So it is about how do we wrap around the right support to try and make sure that those that we know are going to be more challenging discharges, we reduce the likelihood. So that's part of why we then really pull through that qualitative info that sits behind it.
Well, yeah, well, just building on that, I think, and maybe getting into something we can pick up from the primary community bit, is it's also making sure that we're linking back in as much as we can with the GP team and the primary and the community team, because they will know the patient a lot better often than the hospital-based doctors. And some, like Sarah or others may say to hospital list. I said, oh, don't worry about all of that. We've lived with that for the past 10 years. Don't try and solve all of that problem. Let's focus here. So I think as we start to develop this work, maybe we can bring in some of our local GP leaders as well into the conversation to see how we, because this should be an integrated answer to the person's problem, not just a hospital where we just move them from one bit in. We throw into a bit of a black hole into the community. I'm doing everyone a gross disservice. I know that doesn't happen, but there is something about how that conversation is more dynamic between primary and secondary care clinicians about the patients that are particularly complex to say, well, actually, we could probably manage that if we had A, B, and C available.
Very much so, Paul. And one of the pieces of work we want to move from an acute push to a community pull approach. I've had experiences in other places where community matrons will go into the acute hospital and go, I'm taking you all home because I'm managing sicker patients than you at home. And actually, I know I've been looking after you for the last 5 years, and I know that that's your baseline, and it doesn't matter however much we throw at you, we're never going to get you to walk up the stairs. So, and you live really well, so let's bring you home. So the community care group are absolutely trying to create an in-reach matron model that allows us to have that community expertise who know those patients, pulling them rather than we work to different clinical thresholds, and that understanding of the risk that can be managed at home isn't necessarily fully appreciated.
So pulling people out, so I think that's one part of the jigsaw. Looking at the data at the other end, where in here you've very clearly set out how there's been a reduction in the number of urgent and emergency care attendances from care homes.
Yes.
Historically, CTM's had quite a high rate of conveyance from care home into hospital, along with other data as well. But so looking at those reductions, that improvement, is that down to what resilience of care home staff, ambulance staff liaison with NAV hub? It's a mixture of things.
It's a variety of things. So the relationship between the homes and the NAV hub is particularly strong, and we have really encouraged homes to ring the navigation hub prior to phoning 999. And part of that is we've also worked with the homes to train them. So we've done a lot of work around particularly the nursing homes, training them, but we're now doing it with the in-house care homes within RCT, recognising that they don't always have a nurse on shift. So we're training the carers to be able to do a set of obs. And we've also got the tech, we can do remotely long live blood tests and other things. So things that traditionally you've been conveyed to hospital for, we can do through the NAV team. There's a lot more we need to do. Our conveyance rates are still the highest in Wales, within CTM significantly. So our per head of 1,000 population conveyance rate does sit significantly higher than any other health board. So there is still further opportunity for us to intervene prior to conveying a patient into hospital. I think it's equally important to remember that the patients, we look at ambulances, we've got to look at our waiting rooms as well. 50, and it's a number that I've never experienced anywhere else. 50% of our critical care admissions are patients who have walked into our EDs. That is an extraordinary number. There are some very, very, very sick patients sitting in our waiting rooms, and so the challenge for our ED teams, yes, we need to bring that treble crew in, that patient in, but equally they've got some very sick patients sitting in the waiting rooms who clinically need to come in as well. So it is a real challenge for our clinical teams that they have to manage. I think it's really important that we shouldn't assume that just because a patient is on an ambulance, they're our sickest patient, because that isn't the case within CTM.
Thanks, Gav. Yep. Patsy, thank you.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, curious about us still having the highest number of conveyances across Wales. Do we have any data on the number of patients that have been conveyed that maybe could have been treated in a different way?
Not systematically, Patsy, I think, and that's where we tried to do a little bit of that data stratification. So we knew from the data that we had a high conveyance rate from care homes and nursing care homes. So that's why we focused on that cohort first. It is the second bit is we know we convey a lot of people in who've had a fall. And because they're on blood thinning medication, the traditional plan has always been, well, they have to come in and they have to have a scan of their head. So Owen Weeks has done a huge amount of work, working with the neurosurgeons in Cardiff, working with the coroner to look at what a revised pathway could be. So, you know, the Royal College of Emergency Medicine is really clear that patients should only come into ED and have a head scan if there's evidence of trauma. And so we're trying to look at all of those things. It might well be that we bring the patient in on a semi-planned appointment the following day through our same-day emergency care service. But it's trying to be clear. How do we? We've got to get better at stratifying the data and which cohorts are then the next cohorts to look at how we can affect a non-conveyance pathway.
Thanks, Kevin. Okay, unless there are any further questions or comments, we'll note the report. Thank you for the update. That's incredibly helpful. Thank you for the slide deck with all of the data and the analysis. Okay, item 6.2, the month 9 finance updates. Thank you, Sally.
Thanks, Chair. I'll take the report largely as read, and there's just a few things I want to draw your attention to, largely because they do reflect into next financial year, which we've already got our eyes on in terms of what happens next. So the month 9 position was a 0.6 million surplus, which takes us to a 3.4 million deficit year to date, with a forecast break even for the year end. So that means we need to continue to deliver minor in-month surpluses in order to achieve that break even. You remember, I think at the last report, we talked about some of the risks still presented in the report, and those have been reduced substantially by confirmation from Welsh Government for funding support for the Welsh Risk Pool, additional costs, and for the Band 2 to 3 framework. Why that's important is neither of those two are currently supported into next financial year. We're still working around the estimates on Band 2 to 3. Howell's team is working really hard around that. And for Welsh Risk Pool, the change in next year from our baseline in our plan this year is 18.4 million forecast. Our entire uplift for next year is only around 15 million. So for non-pay, so you can see the magnitude of that as an issue, and that one is going to need some concerted action and management with Welsh Government to address it next year. So that one is important. In terms of capital, you'll see that our capital resource is now in this report at 93.3 million. We've seen significant additional capital allocations in the last few weeks, as well as in December. So we will now top out 100 million. So that'll be our largest ever capital programme. I think somewhere around 103, but it does move around. That is a huge challenge for us to expend in the latter part of the year. Stu's team and procurement are doing a huge amount around digital, and we are purchasing vital kit because clearly it's more difficult to enact real estate changes in these latter few months of the year. So it's great that we've got the additional funds, but there is a challenge in terms of how we spend it. I think there's a challenge, interestingly, coming from Welsh Government about the profile of our spend, which now looks back-ended, but that largely reflects when the allocations have been made. So it won't follow a straight line because the allocations haven't followed a straight line. But that might be a question that you get at some point in a meeting around why that is the case. And the other thing I just want to draw people's attention to is our recurrent revenue position, because that's important for next year. So our submitted and approved IMTP for 25-26 plan for an underlying recurrent surplus of 1.7 million by the end of this financial year. At month 9, however, we're now forecasting a an underlying deficit of 10.2 million. That excludes the Welsh risk pool impacts, which we'll consider as being a new year issue because we've had allocations this year. But it does include the shortfall in savings achievement, operational variances, and cost pressures, including the Band 2 to 3 framework. And if you move through to the year-to-date performance and forecast, which is on page 8 of the finance report, you'll see that the overspend year-to-date is largely shown in our delegated budgets, i.e. our services, our care groups, being offset by non-delegated, and we show how that's been achieved. So what we've got is a difficult position going into next year for a large number of reasons, and that will be part of what we need to work through as a board as we come towards the plan for next year. So happy to take any questions, but those were the things I just wanted to draw attention to.
Thank you, Sally. That's really, really helpful. Any questions to Sally on the finance report? Two very quick points for me whilst the members are mulling things over. Accountancy gains. I know you've said there's an accountancy gain of potentially in the region of 5 million. How do we describe what those things that make up an accountancy gain? What is it if you're describing it?
So it's balance sheet release of where we've made provisions or accruals that in the year we assess as no longer being necessary. And we do that on a regular basis. So we review those monthly in order to make sure we release. As you're probably aware, there's a process across NHS Wales as well, where we do agreement of balances on a sort of a regular basis. So month 9 is a big month for that. And we make sure that everybody's positions line up. Sometimes issues are in dispute and we still continue to debate them, but on a debtor-led principle, we have to provide for them.
And that balance between the delegated budget, which we know is always challenging to keep within the limit that is set, and historically, certainly over the last couple of years, we see the delegated budget going out of kilter with what we anticipate, but then offset by reductions in what we spend in the non-delegated budget. In terms of offsetting the one against the other, are we consciously making decisions in the non-delegated budget not to invest in certain things in order to offset what is being spent by the care groups?
Some of it is fortuitous, and some of it is because we can't release the money until we've got a balanced position.
Right.
If you go to the delegated, whilst I agree it has been challenging, each year we've funded to outturn.
Yes.
And so if we take unscheduled care, the previous financial year, an additional 19 million went into the baseline, and yet it is still overspending substantially.
Yeah.
We do need to have and I'm sure we'll be challenged by Welsh Government colleagues when we submit our plan around our control measures and how we are ensuring that people live within the resources that they've been given, which have increased substantially over recent years, and where their head count has also increased substantially over recent years.
Yes, and it is worth reminding the board, I've already called it now, that, and I know we've got a couple of months to go yet until the end of the financial year, but the fact we are still forecasting a break-even position, and this will be the 3rd year of doing so, and therefore allowing us to meet our statutory duty is really, I think, it's one heck of an achievement. Bearing in mind all the things that we have to invest in, to pay for, to manage, and very often we are managing things where we're being hit left field by something that's been decided elsewhere. And as Sally said, the additional cost, and although covered this financial year, but not next financial year, with the Welsh risk pool, and the chairs meeting on Tuesday discussed this in some depth. I know that Paul and the chief exec team are going to be looking at this as well, but this is a huge concern for us, that, as we know, that by 2028-29, the projected risk pool requirement is in excess of 200 million compared to the 78 million that was allocated this year. So these are startling figures that require some thought and some planning. But anyway, and we will come back to that, but really conscious that this is one heck of an achievement. I don't want us to lose sight of the effort, hard graft that's been put in by the entire organisation, led by the executive, not just by Sally, but the work that Howell and others have done as well, because this is not just Sally's responsibility as the finance director. This is all of our responsibility as an organisation to attempt to manage within our our finances. But I just want to place on record my thanks for hopefully where we're heading by the end of March. So I may just jinxed it completely by saying all that, in which case I'll be in trouble. But no, but thank you, Sally. Paul.
Yeah, well, it's as Sally would say, it's the usual proverbial landing the aeroplane on the postage stamp to get to the end of March. But you're right. It's a positive place to be, and clearly it sets. Whilst there's some challenges as Sally described, it puts us in a better place for next year, despite which is a really challenging year. But I'd rather go to a really challenging year where we are than perhaps some of our neighbours who have got an even bigger challenge. But I think, just to the point, a couple of things. We do need to start to look in more forensic detail at some of the overspend issues and why we're driving what's driving some of that. Some of it is acuity. There's no doubt some of it demand, but as Howell and others would rightly remind us, our headcount as an organisation has increased significantly over the past few years, and therefore the question rightly nationally is being posed about, not just for us, everybody, about, well, hang on, we've got more people. Where's productivity from the additional resources being put into this? And so I think Howell and Sally and I were having a chat yesterday about how we, I think, need to have a bit of a reset conversation now moving into next year about how we're going to sort of go through that process of working with the care groups and others to understand that in a bit more detail. And then also thinking about our corporate schemes, which I would acknowledge haven't delivered as much as we would like this year. But again, these are things that are going to need significant effort if we're going to really maximise the opportunities into next year. I think it is also just worth flagging the risks around, the risk pool, and this is of a scale and a magnitude that it can't just be absorbed by an individual organisation. I mean, an £18 million risk for us next year is going to be that one which just blows everything out of the water, really. So we'll talk later about the IMTP and financial position for next year, but I think we're going to have to flag pretty early on, which won't be a surprise to Welsh Government colleagues, that our ability to deliver a balance next year is not going to be possible if we have to assume that all the risk comes into us as an organisation, because that is just across Wales. We're talking, I don't know what the number is for next year, Sally, is it over across Wales?
I can't remember exactly the size. It's
100 million across Wales. Well, that's not
additional.
That's not something that can just be absorbed into the health boards from day-to-day allocations. That's a significant governmental financial risk, which is going to have to be thought through nationally. So there's a conversation going on nationally about that, but I think it might be something we want to do a bit of a briefing. Sally and I are meeting with shared services in a couple of weeks' time, just to sort of get a bit of a feel for it. And it's tricky because these are cases of litigation that have already been processed. They're in the legal process, so there is an inevitability that spend will hit. It's just been a range of factors that conspire to bring it all into a very concerted period of a number of years, where all these claims are now coming through, and they are of significant value, individual claims of multiple millions of pounds. So I just think it might be worth us doing a bit of a brief on this item at a board briefing in the future, once Sally and I've had our conversation with Mrs. Paul, just to make everyone clear, everyone understands it, because it is quite complex, and B, just to think about how we handle it going into the IMTP conversations for next year, because I think we are going to need to make some explicit comments back to Welsh Government about the risk around risk.
Yeah, thanks for Kath, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I totally appreciate all the challenges, and a bit hesitant to ask this, but I thought it's really useful to have the IMT discretionary investment plans detailed. What keeps me awake at night is the things that we're not doing and where we're falling between the gaps in terms of services. And it's going to be no surprise when I mention the children's weight management service, for example, which we haven't been able to give funding to yet. So it's just a question of how are we going to make sure we are going to be able to provide those services in the future, bearing in mind I totally understand the challenges around funding and trying to keep that balanced budget and all the challenges for kind of next year. And I'm just picking that out as one, but I know there'll be other ones in there as well. So it's absolutely fantastic we've got a balanced budget, but I just worry about the things we're not able to give to our population, particularly around our longer term population health needs.
Okay. Well, no, just Paul, just reassure Sally. Don't worry about that. and we're all having to make really difficult choices about how we juggle the needs of our population, service pressures, the requirements to live financial balance and quality and safety. So it is a really difficult challenge. I think on those ones, when we started the year out, we were clear that said, well, we can do these things if we deliver. And this is again the message back into the organisation is to say, if we want to invest, we've got to make sure we're not overspending and we're delivering the things we said we're going to do. And I know it's a really hard message, but we do have to get a bit into that. And I think we are trying to do some stuff in the weight management, aren't we, around extending the PIPIN project to the whole of CTM. And that is something we have confirmed we are going to do. So there is
April,
from the beginning of April, yeah. So we are playing that into next year. But you know, I think it's a case study of the challenge we face in terms of how we make these difficult choices and how we have to try and find ways of supporting our colleagues to realise that changing the way we deliver services, innovating, doing things differently is part of how we're going to be able to release the cash to invest in things we know we need to invest in.
And I think before I bring Sally in all fairness, when we came to approve around the IMTP discussion last year and the budget, you know, the ability to invest was also predicated on delivering our savings plan. And I think that, yeah, and that is tough. It is tough. It's tough messaging, isn't it, to say to people, we have to be more efficient in what we do, in the way that we use this money, in order to release the capacity to invest in the things we want to invest in. But you know, it's sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, you're right in terms of the savings. We were always clear, and they have not been delivered. You know, centrally led schemes are at a very marginal delivery against the target, and that's what's impacting in part into next year. But we've also got significant operational variances. So in the underlying position, we're showing operational variances as at month 9 of 18.1 million. So those are investments. We are spending more on our services by a very significant degree. The problem is it's in an unplanned way and we're not really clear on what we're getting from it. So that's why we need to focus on our controls and understanding what's being delivered for that additional spend. And frankly, we do also need to pull that back. And we can call it savings or we can call it variances, but in reality, we need to ensure that our spend stays within our allocations, because that's our statutory duty.
It is. Thank you, Sally. Neil, then Gethin and Don. Thank you. Thanks, Neil.
Yeah, just a reflection really on the risk pool, which is absolutely staggering in reality. Would really welcome the deep dive. I think that's really important to do that. I think in terms of modelling, it's good to understand that the modelling is actually things in the pipeline. So this is not just an exponential extrapolation of the number, it's actually a pipeline of cases. The thing that worries me though is we've got a number of 200 currently. Does it continue to rise like that, or is that a peak and we see some tail off? Has that been modelled? Because I guess if it's an exponential increase beyond 200, then that's one thing. If it's a peak that we need to manage through, that might be something else.
There is a bit of a bulge, I think, at the moment, Sally, isn't there? So there's a number of factors about this. There was a post during COVID. Obviously, the number of cases being processed went down significantly because the legal system wasn't operating at full operation. So a number of those cases slowed right down. And so we've got a post-COVID sort of activity gain. The other thing is the complexity of the choice that payments make, where they could. It used to be the case that people would have a lump sum and then take the rest of their settlement as payments over a period of years, because bear in mind these are lifetime, often lifelong payments. There's been a shift in trends that people are now wanting to take the lump sum. There's a whole heap of reasons why people do that. One of the reasons is if the person then dies, a lump sum's counted as part of their estate. If they don't, and it's periodic payments, that isn't counted as part of your estate. So there's all that going on as well behind the scenes. And I think the question about whether we think it's going to go beyond the 200, that's part of what we want to have a conversation with shared services about, is, to be honest, is this a straight line upwards, or is this a peak and then it's going to come back down again to a more manageable
The
level?
actions you take may well be different based on which of
Yeah,
those two.
and let's not forget the reality of how we contain this is by delivering safer care in the first place.
Yeah.
Because these are all claims where things have gone wrong. There's been incidents. There's been issues. So one of the things I think we've got to. I worry sometimes we treat risk pool over here as just a
Yes.
financial thing, but it's not. It's about it's reimbursement for mistakes that were made often many years ago. I mean, I'm signing off cases that were things that happened in 2012. You know, these aren't things that happened last year or the year before, but there is something about how we remind our colleagues that when we have incidents or events, it does have consequence down the line, and we need to try and use the experience of these events to change the way we do things and learn from the experience and make things safer and better.
So I agree, it's a really good point to try to look at. We've got that 3-year look,
Yeah.
but not further. What we're going to try and do a bit of work around, because it's what you might call funny accounting for this stuff. So if you look at our reports that go to audit committee, it's not that amusing, is it?
I was going to say, didn't he? That's a stop, isn't it?
So when a case becomes reasonably certain, we provide for it in the accounts, and you'll see that in our reports that go to audit committee. However, we provide for it through money called, that's known as AMI, or annually managed expenditure in Welsh Government. And that is like a different pocket. And then when it comes to the point where you make the cash settlement, which is what is Welsh risk pool, that's when it hits our expenditure,
Yeah.
our sort of requirements. So you have a delay, so we can see the provision has been building up over recent years.
We're not making the
We do make the provision, but then we have an offset from Welsh Government, so it gets neutralised in that way. So it only hits our books when it hits us, when we make payments to the individual, which is why there's this huge delay, and why I suppose I fear that actually it will go beyond the 200, but we do need to get that work done by shared services who host the Welsh risk pool.
Gethin.
Yeah, I just sorry, coming back to the operational variances, where we are isn't acceptable. Sally and I had a day of finance reviews for the care groups this week. There are some areas which are performing well, but there are a number of care groups where either care groups as a whole or specific directorates within those care groups. So there are a number of areas where we're doing some very bespoke work now to really understand what's driving some of that, what the opportunities are, and really how we begin to shift that. Absolutely recognise and agree with Sally. We've made some significant investments over the last 2 years into the care groups with their year-end settlements, and it is really important that they use that effectively. You know, it ties back in part to what Howell was talking about in terms of sickness absence, because we're running with sickness absence, so we're paying staff not to be at work, and I think it's about 800 a day, isn't it, of staff who aren't in work every day. But we're actually, for many of those areas, we're having to backfill into clinical services. So we've got, so all of those things are really, really important of how we manage our budgets on effectively every day. But equally, it is then around the level of control and scrutiny we've got over how we're deploying the resource we've got, because we have got a worked headcount increase from previously. Are we seeing a significant productivity improvement linked to that? No, we're not. So again, it's how are we realising the additionality in terms of output with that additionality of input, and so all of that we really need to scrutinise and get that under.
Dom. Thanks.
Yeah, it was really sort of, I was going to say, get the point there about the headcount productivity, that's one part, but it's partly sort of what Sally was saying as well, is that I think we have to start putting that planned approach into how we do things. None of us are happy at the moment, because as traditional, we're always looking forwards, aren't we? We always want to say, what thing can we do? What are we going to do next? Because we don't rest on our laurels, but we don't stop and look back at how much we've done. And if you compare us with a lot of other health groups, some of the things we've managed to achieve, is staggering, considering the fact we've also managed to meet our financial targets. But I think if you go and ask any of our clinicians, they'll all give you a list of things they want to do when we do our rounds and that. But I think we've got very used to, for the last sort of few years, there was very much a scattergun approach to how we invested. There was no plan, there was no strategy, and it was sort of, oh, you've got a bit of it, we'll give some money there, we'll try that. And that's how people got used to things happening, and so they still expect that to happen. And I think now in this day and age, we're trying to sort of teach both ourselves and the kids a different way of doing it, that we have to do it by a process, we have to follow this sort of structure. And that's causing some discomfort amongst our clinicians. It's causing a lot more discomfort for us around the table here, because we are going to have to make that decision as to which areas aren't going to get that funding. And you have sleep science, I promise you, we on every one of us around this table do quite regularly. But we have done a huge amount, and I think that's the only thing I can reassure us on, that we're doing the right thing. The care we're delivering is really good. I know we talk about the bad things, because they always come up to those things, but there's a lot of fantastic care that's going on out there for our population. But I think the fact that we're trying to do it in a different way doesn't mean we're not worrying in any way, shape or form. We still are at all.
Thank you, Don. Okay, the board will note the report. Thank you very much indeed, Sally. We'll move on to item 6.3, the Forest View Medical Centre, the application of branch surgery in Treorchy, and I'll ask Gethin to introduce the report, which is for approval. Thank you, Gethin.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this paper has gone through a number of committees, most recently through ODC, where it was endorsed. This is the proposed closure of the branch surgery on the High Street in Treorchy. So Forest View Medical Centre has a main site and two branch surgeries, one just to the south of the main site, one to the north. This proposed, the High Street branch is the branch to the south. This is it is used for wellbeing services, so no core GPs and nursing services are provided. So it is some wellbeing services that are provided from that facility. We've gone through a really robust engagement process, really with good engagement from the practice, good engagement from the local politicians. The big public meeting, or a public meeting, was put on. No attendance from the population, and no significant concerns raised through that process, which Slice hosted on our behalf. And clearly within the pack, you've got the letter from Slice outlining their endorsement of the process that we followed. So just seeking board's approval to support the closure of the branch surgery on the High Street in Treorchy.
Thanks, Gethin. Before I check in with Daniel from Slice to see if he wants to provide an update, I'll come to Dom next. Thank you, Dom.
I was just going to make a comment about the Forest View. I mean, how well they've come in. It was only a few years ago we had a discussion at this board here about some sort of local unhappiness. So they faced a lot of opposition to some of their plans, and that's gone from that to no one turned up at one of their meetings when they proposed a change. And I think that full credit to them for their engagement with the local population over the last few years, really, and turning that around with support from the local authority and from the wellnesses. So I just wanted to put that on record. I think
thanks, Dom. Yeah, really appreciate it. Reece, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Gethin. I think with this, and I speak from a local authority point of view, just because no one turned up doesn't mean you're not.
No, I get that. Yeah, I appreciate it.
And unfortunately, you know, this is something that we face up at Gend, and I'm sure it'll be true with colleagues in Merthyr and RCT, that you put out public consultations, you try and invite everyone everywhere, you put posters everywhere, you go on social media and you ask people to turn up. They still don't turn up, and they'll still tell you you were wrong and you didn't ask them, and they're going to be really angry about that. So, and you know, having looked at this, I think the case for it absolutely makes sense. It doesn't disadvantage the population. It's a very close surgery branch to the main surgery, and I think it makes complete sense. But I think it'd be interesting for me to know, from a comms perspective, what are we doing as a board to ensure that that's managed, because there will inevitably be naysayers, and we all know now that, you know, if there is one or two naysayers on Facebook, they can have an outsized sort of impact. And once the ball starts rolling, it's often hard to stop. So I think proactively, what are we doing to ensure that when this does go public and this is agreed, that we're ahead of that?
I'll let Simon come in more specifically on I guess the common strategy as a whole. In terms of this case, this has been out very much in the public domain. It's been led and supported. You know, the PPG has been very active in its engagement through this process, and in fact, have been very vocal in its support and endorsement. Local MSs and councillors who historically have been really critical of the practice, again, have played a really important role. You know, and I think we considered a similar situation last year at board, 18 months ago in board, regarding a branch surgery, where a significant amount of engagement from local politicians who were concerned about change. So I expected far more noise, being honest, regarding this, particularly recognising the level of concern that there has been previously in the community regarding that practice, and the views of the patients who in that patch. So I think all the patients who registered have been written to. There's quite a prescribed process of engagement that we have to follow with this, so I think it's very much been in the public domain for the duration.
Simon, thanks.
Thanks, Chair. I think Reece, you make a very good point that just because we don't get larger numbers of people turning up doesn't mean there's not interest amongst the community. As Gethin has said, Forest View have really turned around their relationship with their patients and with their PPG within the last couple of years. It's been a real sea change, and I think there's a huge amount has been done to build really a trust between the practice and patients, which I think is really useful in this particular case. The practice, is supported by primary care and supported when it needs to by my team, as all practices are, in terms of engagement and communication. On this particular occasion for this change, there wasn't a huge amount required from us, but I think going forward, as you're kind of intimating, Reece, we need to make sure when this change does take effect that we continue to engage, continue to communicate with patients, and continue to have an open door and continue to listen to how the change may impact people going forward as well. So I don't think it doesn't just start and end here. It's a continual dialogue as well, and we will continue to work with the practice to make sure that's the case.
Thanks, Simon. Any other questions? Yes, Dennis, thank you.
I'd just like to confirm that there's been little or no reaction from the local community. A couple of years ago, when there were problems with the practice, it was all across the local Facebook pages, etc. I haven't seen any, and the practice have assured the patients that there will be no diminution in service. So I'm quite happy with the proposal.
Excellent, thank you. Daniel, I'll come to you now. We've had the letter from Fleiss, which has been really helpful as part of the pack. But just any reflections from your point of view before I ask the board to give their approval? Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I suppose I'm echoing what's been said by Simon and Dom in the room already. The process, and I've said this in Taff Vale when this came to board, and same here, the process followed in primary care on these two last changes is something that should be held up as very good practice and should be echoed across other service changes. There's been a massive willingness to engage, testament to the practice and the community. Yet the transition from where it was 3 years ago, or just over 3 years ago, is in stark contrast. You may recall I personally was involved in the issues back then, and when I attended in the area for what I thought would be an hour's meeting with maybe 20 people. I ended up speaking to 70 to 80 people and had to put out a survey and collected 850 responses, as well as the social media traffic. So there is a stark contrast reflecting back. Looking at Reese's point and following on from Simon, the test here is not the numbers participating, but the opportunity afforded to the community. And I think the opportunity afforded in this regard has been excellent and has been ample. And ongoing, again, I would point to the Taff Vale example that we've got, that they've continued to engage with the population. They've set up a PPG, they've involved the local councillors. Forestview are already on that journey from the issues from 3 years ago. So as long as they continue, I can see no issues.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Reece?
Yeah, can I just, Dan, thanks for that, and Simon as well. Just, you know, it's great to hear place saying that this is, you know, really well executed bit of consultation, and I'm sure it will be. But are we capturing that as best practice in terms of going forward for sort of future engagement? I think that is really
Yeah. Good. Okay. Thanks. Okay, the board's being asked to approve the closure. Can I ask board to do so? Thank you very much. So just to confirm that we have approved to close the branch site located at 128 High Street, Torquay. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, we'll move on to item 7, our strategic planning section, and the first item is the IMTP for 2026 to 2029. And I'll ask Claire to present the report, which is for noting. Thank you, Claire.
Yes, so as you said, Chair, for noting, and this is the first public board since the guidance has been released. But of course, we've had conversations as well around the implications of that guidance. And so I won't talk through all the totality of the pack. Just to say, the key messages are an emphasis on plans free of discretionary investment, a retarding of ambition in relation to access targets in comparison to previous years. We need to have further discussions around our intention to deliver a balanced plan. As you know, there is a significant, we've already talked about it under Sammy's item, significant challenge in that, and in relation to how we balance the risk around delivery and finance. In terms of the internal processes, there's key milestones for feedback to Welsh Governments included in the item. We've got a detailed timeline behind that in terms of the activities that are going on, both through the steering group that oversees the development of the IMTP and care group interaction with that. We've got an away day coming up in a couple of weeks with care groups and corporate teams to work through the delivery of the IMTP in 26-27. From a board perspective, we've got a board briefing next week and again 2 weeks after that, so plenty of opportunity to discuss those emerging plans and the timeline for the AO letter in relation to the balance plan. Ahead of the board development session on the 26th, where we'll again have another opportunity to look at the detail and the content.
Thank you, Claire. Okay, thank you very much. Any comments or questions? There's a lot of information in the presentation covering the context, the ministerial priorities, the planning framework that we have to adhere to, amongst all of the other commitments that we've made as a health board, to support this nationwide effort on some key areas of delivery, along with our own priorities, of course, to advance our CTM 2030 plan. So, any questions or comments at this point? Oh, sorry.
Just quickly comment on, I mentioned, I think when we last discussed it, about the research framework assessment for healthcare and research Wales, which has to feed into this. And I'd be pleased to know that there is a good process now for developing that, and Lauren is leading on this, and it's going to come to Q&S for sign off on the 24th of March. So there's a really good process now for that coming through us and then feeding in. So hopefully that's all. Thanks.
Okay. So the plan going forward, Claire, is to, so we got the session on 26th of February,
yes, we have as a board, we've got 2 board briefings between now and then as well. And I should have said, sorry, that the first cut submissions are due back to the steering group next week in terms of this. I'm trying to get to a set the scenario plans in terms of how can we balance those those risks. So so that will lead into those discussions in February.
So the key sort of immediate date was the 13th of February, isn't it?
Yes.
Where we've got to
Letter.
send in a letter to say we don't think we're going to be able to deliver a balanced plan. Or it may be that we send a letter saying, that there's options, but depending on the risk pool, because candidly that is going to be the fundamental, one of the biggest fundamental determinants of that. So that will probably be, I mean, as in previous year, we'll make sure we share that the contents of that letter, but we'll have an opportunity. We got a board briefing before then, haven't we? Yeah. So we'll be able to have the opportunity to sort of confirm where we think we're at. A, based on the feedback we're getting now from various service areas, and B, from a conversation with yourselves as independent members, and that will guide then the response that we draft to Welsh Government on the 13th, which is the first sort of declaring of the hand, I guess. Yeah, just for balance. It's always balance.
Okay. Right, so we've got a process, plenty of opportunity for board to engage in this before we get to the final point at the end of March, where we take our formal board decision. But thanks to Claire, and obviously Sally was here as well, because there's a lot in here, which is those key strategic planning elements, but also the finances as well. Which this is where we bring it all together. Okay, thank you very much indeed. We'll note the report. If we can move on to item 7.2. Our strategy deployment. This is for approval. And again, Claire, really grateful for the way in which this has been pulled together in the presentation, but I'll hand over to you to take us through it.
Yeah, thank you. So, as you say, approve the direction of travel and comment on the content of this. It has previously, in a more detailed form, gone to Strategic Development Committee. This is a strategy deployment framework is a common tool used in organisations to ensure the alignment of our activity to our strategic intent. So it does link to the chair's points earlier about board development and how we ensure we stay focused on building healthier communities and the role of primary and community care in that. It also speaks to the conversation that we had about the IPR and how do we stay across all the many domains that we are responsible for. Fundamentally, tighter alignment around a number of priorities is part of the function of the health board in service of our overall strategic agenda, and the strategy deployment framework is a route to doing that. I just would draw board members' attention to a couple of slides within the pack. So slide 6, which is a fairly reductive architecture for a strategy deployment framework, but it shows how the pillars of our strategy can link to board governance and the IPR in terms of metrics in both in service of Welsh Government agenda and our policy and our strategy. And as I say, those tend to be process measures in there rather than outcome measures, but given the complexity and ambition of the health board agenda, we have to be able to simplify and rationalise that to that measurement system to a degree. I think within there is also then the kind of common language and architecture around corporate projects, strategic initiatives and enabling plans, so that people understand where do these documents, where do these ambitions sit and how do we define them. Slide 7 talks then about the creation of a consolidated resource in terms of, and just to be clear, this is not a new resource, these are people who are already fully occupied delivering what we're already doing, but it gives us an ability to have better perhaps oversight of that and coordination of that and alignment of our efforts. So that strategic delivery unit bringing together expertise in improvement science, in in project and programme methodology, and in value-based healthcare. And we've made moves to bring those teams together into the strategy and transformation directorate already. Slides 8 to 10 talk then about some of the foundational components for the delivery of our strategy, and we've talked about those at SDC, but I welcome people's feedback on all of that.
Okay, Kathy, thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say I think this is really good. I'm really pleased to see this. You know, it really makes sense to me, and you know, it's I've come into, what am I now, about 7 months in. You know, this I think would make it, if this was in place, much more coherent at board level. You know, to set out and then to manage the overall direction of travel. So really pleased to see this.
Any comments to Claire on the content or any questions on?
Yeah, I just want to say the same thing, really. Obviously, it came to SDC, really pleased to see it. And I think, you know, we've got a committee coming up in a couple of weeks, and looking at, you know, we all know we've got to transform our services, you know, and I think some of them, and I think looking at the case for change, and then also what the future state's going to look like, I think this is going to really help us and hopefully help the whole organisation be such a larger conversation as well. And also what we're not going to do, as well as what we are doing. I think that sort of prioritisation, which we know is really difficult, but actually we're going to have to do more of, I think is going to be really helpful. So really welcome this, and thank you, Claire, and everyone else who's done the work on this.
No, thanks. And I guess I tie it back, John, to the comments you made in your report about ambition and how we need to try and think about the board agenda and a time to talk about some of these topics, because I'm just conscious that we can get very wrapped up in the immediate and the operational stuff that's obviously very real and present for us. But I guess there's something about how do we take this framework and then use it to sequence throughout the year. And I know that's one thing Claire and I've talked about, is that, you know, how can we share with you when you could expect an update on, I don't know, Children's Health Park, or when you could expect an update on primary and community care work. So it's almost like alongside this, having that sort of quarterly plan to say, well, actually, you should by end of quarter 2, you should have, we should be bringing back something to board or SDC or wherever. So I think the next stage of this is perhaps Claire and Gareth and others working together in the sort of sequencing of what do we think
we've got a draft of that,
the board business.
Put a draft that together, Paul, and that's something I'll work with Claire and share with the board at the end of February.
Yeah, just, I mean, I've said to Claire before, I think this is brilliant. I mean, the shape that she and her, you know, put to this, recognising as well that much we're doing in the prevention space will be through partners. So there's the audience as well for partners to understand what we're doing internally. I've been reading a paper to SDC about the role of the Public Service Board and their ambitions around reducing health inequalities, and we have to work hand in glove with our partners across the field. So it's great.
If I was just absolutely, and I can't remember where it is in the papers, but it does talk about the fact that this then enables the connections to be easier. And I have shared this with colleagues in local authorities who are, you know, keen to make sure that we can do the plugging in through the RPB and plugging.
Digital factory sounds fun, development testing.
One of the things I would say is that it's emergent, isn't it? And we need to work over time to do that, so not everything on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's good to see the impression. Thank you, Claire. Okay, board is being asked to approve the report this afternoon. Board happy to do so? Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Huge enthusiasm. That's brilliant. Thank you, Claire. Thanks. That's superb. Okay. Item 8, the consent agenda. Just to say, there are a number of items listed, 8.1.1 down to 8.1.6 for approval. I wasn't going to go through them individually, but if you're happy to approve them en bloc, thank you very much. Those items for noting under 8.2 down to 8.2.4. Under 9.1, I don't think there's any other business.
Sorry, Chair, can I just on the JCC report?
Oh, right.
I just think maybe there's another. I hate to keep bringing more things to the table in terms of challenges, but there is, I think, a big, and it will be part of our IMTP conversation a bit. But there is probably a strategic conversation we've got to have as well about JCC, because obviously that's our specialist commissioning and ambulance commissioning. There are some significant, having been at the JCC committee this week, there are some significant risks, not just to this year's financial position, but also into next year from specialist commissioning. And these are very, very high-end, expensive treatments that we have to make some pretty difficult conversations on. So I'm just conscious sometimes it's just there as a line of JCC, but behind it is a huge raft of very, very difficult service areas where we act as one of 7 health boards making those decisions. But I know Claire is working quite closely with colleagues in the direction of planning space and with JCC on that. But I'm just thinking, Claire, Sally, I wonder whether we might, as part of our board development session on IMTP, I'm not saying we need 2 hours on it, but I think we should probably just articulate some of the risks. There's things like, kidney dialysis care, NICU and PICU costs, all of which are escalating quite significantly. And I think it's probably worth just appraising board members just at a high level of some of those challenges.
Thanks, Paul. I would certainly welcome that.
Just to support that. But I think one of the things is that often it feels like those decisions we don't have any choice about. When people are saying, we're committed to funding this, or you get nice guidance, or whatever, there's so many things that you just think you're presented with. And there isn't an option for us to say we're not doing that. So I think it's explore what is the mechanism for us to, and actually, it doesn't matter how much you've approved, there's no money to go out.
Well, this is the point, Karen. For me, we're having to make some difficult decisions about our core services that we deliver locally. And there's something about, we can't, I was making a point JCC this week is, I feel uncomfortable allocating more money into specialist services when we're not allocating money into our core service. So to give you an example, they were quoting example, if one patient goes to Newcastle for stem cell transplant, that's £300,000 for one patient. And I went, well, how many hips could we do? And that's the ethical challenge we've got in this at the moment, where we've only got a limited pot of resource. So I think it may be useful for us to have that conversation and understand a bit of a position, I think, going into the JCC conversation.
Because I think it is often presented as you have no choice in this.
And some of it is uplifting.
And we are having to make the weight management. Making those choices all the time, aren't we? So I think it's a really good point.
I think just to give you some assurance, the JCC conversations this year have clearly been a lot more challenging than in previous years. So the health boards are very clearly, and of course it is we are the JCC, absolutely. And so, but we are having that very challenging discussion about we can't continue to simply uplift and invest. So,
Dom?
In terms of the IPFR process for those sort of cases from there, we are quite stringent on those, and there has to be some good evidence behind it. But of course, then there's the option to escalate that up to the JPC, and that's where the difficulty comes, where everyone's different thresholds come into play, and when you have that on a national level, we might be quite stringent on it. Others aren't, and that's how it gets to. So it gets approved, and then we then have to because it's gone through. So it's those cases that we have to work much closer with JCC on the timeline.
Stu?
Not to take us off on too much of a chat tangent, but this obviously equally applies in additional data space for us in many ways. But just to give you further assurance on that, we're now doing some blueprint work nationally, looking at some of the governance arrangements around this, so that there's clear opportunity for more of a decision rather than a fixed conflict.
Okay, thank you for that. We'll make sure we incorporate that into the conversation going forward on the IMTP. We've noted those items under 8.2. I don't think there's any other business this afternoon that colleagues need to raise. Just to say, we've got a private in-committee board meeting following this meeting, and that is to discuss the mental health single clinical record procurement. And the reason why it's in private section is it's commercially sensitive. So just to make that clear, the date and time of the next meeting is the board will meet in public on the 26th of March. And that again will be a very important meeting for the board, because that's the point at which we will be seeking to discuss and hopefully approve our IMTP, which includes our plans for financial plan for 2026-27 as well. So thank you for that. Rydw i'n dod y cyfarfod y bwrdd iecu y ben, hofyn i'r ddiolchgar sydd wedi ymuno â ni gwylio cyfarfod heddiw. I'll now bring the board meeting to a close, and my thanks to all of those who participated in the meeting or observed our proceedings today. Thank you all very much.
Yeah.
So we've got our